Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Josie Smith, and I am the social media and events coordinator here at Madison Street Books. We are a new-ish independent bookstore in Chicago's West Loop, and we are so excited tonight to be hosting Sujata Massey and Susan Elia Macneal. A little bit of housekeeping, and feel free to keep talking in the chat. That's fantastic. You are welcome to ask questions there, or at the bottom of your screen, there's an ask a question button. If you can type in there, we'll be able to see it throughout the evening. So I will introduce our authors and then turn it over to them. Sujata Massey was born in England to parents from India and Germany. She grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and currently lives in Baltimore, Maryland. She was a features reporter for the Baltimore Evening Sun before becoming a full-time novelist. The first Praveen mystery novel, The Widows of Malabar Hill, was an international bestseller and won the Agatha, McCavity, and Mary Higgins Clark Awards. Susan Elia Macneal is the New York Times best-selling author of the Maggie Hope mysteries. Macneal won the Barry Award and has been nominated for the Edgar, McCavity, Agatha, Lefter Coast Crime, Dillies, and ITW Thriller Awards. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her husband and son. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our authors.
Hi, it's so nice to see you. I wish we were doing this in person, though.
Yes, Susan,
year,
I remember so happily a few years ago sitting at a cafe in Brooklyn with you. And
yes, an outdoor garden.
Yeah, and that's how we really got to know each other.
Absolutely. But I got to know you. Your editor asked me for a blurb for the first Praveen mystery. And I was knocked off my perch when I read that. I thought Praveen was just such an amazing heroine and just such an amazing addition to I don't know, the female sleuth and the sleuth. What am I saying? Sleuths of mystery. And I thought she was such a breath of fresh air. So I was just wondering, can you tell us a little bit about how Praveen came about? Like, how did she come to you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying all those wonderful things. And I was blurbing The Hollywood Spy. So
I know that, yeah, book 10.
World, and like, please don't say it's incestuous, but historical writers, like, we do a kind of work that it's so specific, and that when we can see someone else taking that same kind of care and love, it's like we just want to shout it to the world, because historical readers want to read more good historical fiction from everybody.
Absolutely.
So that's my little introduction to our relationship and how we read each other's work. And you were asking me about how Praveen came about, and she really was just so spontaneously and quickly generated. It was very strange, because I had written mystery fiction before. I wrote a whole series with an amateur sleuth set in modern Japan. And, that woman was not a lawyer. That woman was not Indian. She was a combination of Japanese and American. And I had written sort of like a regular historical novel set in India in 2012, and that was published in 2013. And I knew I wanted to write more, but I couldn't see following that up. It was a literary novel, and it's more of a challenge to do a follow-up with something like that. And but I was in love with that world, and I had the chance. I decided to try to write a mystery set in that time period, but I wanted to have it be something that the character would have a genuine, sensible motivation to continue solving mysteries. I knew I wanted to do more than one. That was why I was getting back in the mystery book. And fortunately, I had saved research from my prior book on India, and I knew that there were women lawyers in turn of the century India, and it seemed quite remarkable given what we know about women in the law all over the world. And also what we hear about, people being constrained, women being constrained. But since that existed, I thought, I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to make a woman lawyer character, Praveen Mistry, who actually has the precedent of at least a couple of other women lawyers in India before her. And I made her a member of a minority religious community in Bombay, the Parsis, who are the Indian-born Zoroastrians. And I get asked a lot about why I made my character a member of a minority group. And there are a couple answers to that. And the first is that even though they were a minority group, they made up a third of the lawyers in the city at the turn of the century in India.
Oh, I did not know that.
So a big legal community, also a community that supported women pursuing education and having professional jobs before other groups in India did. So that was another boon for making as realistic as possible. And finally, the fact that she belongs to this minority group makes it possible for her to pass more easily between Eastern and Western worlds and cultures. Because yes, she is Indian, but also a lot of the people in her community were doing business with the British and on a fairly high level. So that she had more power. She had a race privilege. We talk about that now, but she had one then. So let's talk about Maggie, because Maggie is an American, but there's a really big British connection.
Really big British connection. So Maggie came to me, it was completely unexpected when I visited the Churchill War Rooms in London. And if you've ever gone there, it's just a magical place because it just takes you back into the past so immediately and viscerally. And so I went, and you're walking the corridors where Churchill did and where the War Cabinet did, and all of a sudden I knew I wanted to write a novel set there. And I was also I knew I was so out of my league. I knew I was so I'd never written a novel, but the fiction that I had done was all sort of present day, like New York women, contemporary career women, sort of Sex in the City, if you will. So, here I was in a different time period and also a different country. And how could I even possibly make this work? But my husband was really, really, really supportive, and I can't thank him enough. And eventually, after much research and much tearing my hair out, it did work. So.
It's interesting. I feel that way too. I feel like I'm really going out of my comfort zone because I don't live in Mumbai and I'm doing this kind of work. Sometimes I think, who am I to try to do this? So
I hear you. I hear you.
And I think the best that I can do is spend time as I can there, read a lot of original accounts of the time by Indians, and then, develop a network of friends. Do you have a lot of people that are kind of experts on World War II history that you talk to?
Absolutely. But I have, I don't know if this work is the same thing for you, but I have a friend who's sort of an expert on poisons, and I have a friend who's a doctor and who gives me medical advice for when I have dead bodies. And then I have a friend who is she is 84. She's a professor emeritus at Berkeley, and she was a little girl during the Blitz in London. Her family did not take her to the country, so she reads my manuscripts just to make sure everything's okay on that perspective, that would really have happened in London and it would have happened like that. She gives me amazing advice. I had this radio show that was really popular, It's That Man Again. And if for people of a certain generation, that will ring a ton of bells. And I remember I had it on, I just wanted to kind of throw it in. And she was like, no, it was Thursday at 8:30. And we all sat in our chairs in the living room and we waited for It's That Man Again. And it was a big deal. So it's okay, let's get this correct. So yeah, it takes a village. It really does. And I'm so grateful to each and every person.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really special about writing early 20th century mysteries, which is what we both do, and we have James Ziskin in our audience.
I know. Hi,
He
James.
also writes 20th century
And
historical.
he just won a Barry Award. So
Yes,
congratulations, James.
One of the joys of it is we can find people, very, very old people, that either experienced it or had a parent or an aunt or an uncle experience it. And they're like treasures. I mean, they're just like treasures. And I will go anywhere for an old person in India. I mean, really, I really, I'll never forget. I had a chance to interview a very, very decorated senior Indian historian, and he'd been in the freedom movement. He'd been thrown in jail by the British, and he'd been, lying down and on the ground and bed bugs in the jails, and he could just tell me what it was like to be in the prison. How amazing is that?
That's really amazing. Okay, I have to shamelessly name drop now. Through the wonders of the internet, back when I was writing Mr. Churchill's secretary, I actually got a chance to exchange letters, snail mail, with one of Churchill's actual wartime secretaries. She was in South Africa, Cape Hope, and we exchanged, those blue, with the little stripes on them, the airmail stationery. Anyway, we wrote back and forth a bit, and I treasure them. It's just so amazing. And what she said about my book was that she's like, I don't think we would have had time for any of this, Susan, but it's a very nice book.
Well, did you not name Maggie Hope after Kate Hope?
No.
What a coincidence.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. But no. Maggie was Margaret was the third most popular name in 1915, which is her birth date. I'm sure you go back to the census to find out what were popular names. And then Hope, I was just looking up all these different Brits to look for British last names because she is half British. And honestly, there was Bob Hope, and I was just like, that's such a great last name on so many levels. So I have to thank Bob.
Yeah, that I could see that you would want to. She's starting the story before the United States gets involved in the war, right? But she's passionate and she's really upset about what's going on. She's an activist, really. She's trying to.
She is,
stop it, especially in this book. So why don't you talk a little bit about this book, and it kind of takes her to a new level, I think, what goes on in this book.
Oh, do you mean Hollywood Spy?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So Maggie gets to come back to the United States, which even though she was raised in the outskirts of Boston, LA is a kind of foreign country to a lot of us, even though we're Americans. So she gets to come to this land of sunshine and exotic flowers and movie stars, but there's this really dark sort of underbelly that she also learns about once she's there and she's investigating a murder. And that was one of the things about the Bombay Prince that I loved, because I felt like we were on a similar path in a lot of ways. We were looking at sort of the dark underbelly of history that a lot of people miss because, there are things that are glossed over. And I really felt that you hit a lot of those notes too. So can you talk about your research for Gandhi and how did you research that?
Sure. Well, I learned that, it's, I guess, a common fact that Prince Edward, who later became King Edward VIII, and after that the Duke of Windsor, because he lost, he abdicated. Okay, so he's a 27-year-old, extremely handsome blonde bachelor, and the government sent him to India and other colonial outposts to cement, loyalty to the Raj. So I knew that had happened, And if you look at newspaper articles that were taken, because lots and lots of international press went and covered this event, people were very, oh, they love him, the crowds are full of people. But actually what happened is there were 3 days of riots that followed his arrival, because a group of people, Mahatma Gandhi during that time was a lawyer, just sort of really pulling together the freedom movement in Bombay, and he called for a boycott of the prince's arrival and this grand procession. And when the people who went to his rally, which involved a bonfire and throwing European clothes into the flames, when those folks finished they were all riled up in the bonfire, and they were coming back into the city, and they crossed paths in the train station with all the dressed up people who had been at the parade. And you might think, oh, who would go to the parade for the Prince of Wales? Is it only English people? No, it was a variety of people, but there were a lot of Anglo-Indians who had protected status and special jobs from the government because they had British blood. And there were a lot of Parsis, members of this religious minority. And so when these riots broke out, they would be targeting people based on how they were dressed and what kind of a hat they wore. Are you wearing a hat of a freedom fighter? Are you wearing a white lace blouse under your sari? That means you're a Parsi. Are you an Indian in a European suit? So it kind of reminded me, in the beginning of your book, you talk about the Zoot Suit riots. And could you tell us more, just let us all know exactly what a Zoot Suit is, because I'm not sure I got it right. And just tell about the riots.
Sure. So I knew this book was going to be the summer of 1943. So that's basically all I knew going in. And I knew it was going to be in LA. So I began to research what was going on. And boy, they had just gotten through, in June of 43, they had just gotten through the Zoot Suit riots. And basically, it's sort of a long, convoluted story, but there was a murder. And Latino men, especially those who wore the Zoot suits, the sort of Cab Calloway-esque double-breasted blazers that were really long, and then the really long baggy pants. It was really popular among jazz musicians. So then these Black and Latino men and women were targeted by the police, and also by incoming sailors, because Los Angeles was really the waiting room for the Pacific Theater. And so, everybody sort of passed through there, and the Marines would basically go out hunting guys in Zoot suits. So that was the riots of June 1943. And the thing is, it was so bizarre, because I was writing this mostly in the last summer of 2020. And in 1943, there were also riots in Detroit. There were riots in New York City. There were riots in cities in Georgia and in Texas. And it just it felt that we have come so far, and yet really just not far enough at all. So that was really tough to write about. And also just to see how little has changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I really felt that. And you delve into the world of not just the KKK, but Nazism in the United States. And I've seen the plot of Against America, and so I was aware of it as being a force maybe in New York and New Jersey among German people, but it seemed like it was a little bit different in California.
Well, it's so funny. My husband went on this business trip to Los Angeles, and he came home with this book called Hitler in Los Angeles. And it came out in, God, I don't know, 2007, I think. And it was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And it's this amazing book. It reads like a thriller. And it basically tells the story of all of the different Nazi groups that were sort of coming up and becoming stronger during the 1930s. For instance, Anaheim, California was called Klanaheim. And there were silver shirts, which were like the brown shirts of the Germans, but, you know, in California. And there was the German American Bund. And, you know, we don't really pay attention to this part of our history. And it kind of got, I don't know, it just sort of got washed over. But this wonderful scholar, Stephen R. Ross, wrote about it. And my dear husband, who did not bring me jewelry, brought me this book. And not only did it inspire The Hollywood Spy, but it's inspired my first standalone novel, which is going to be coming out in a year or so. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you more about that at the end.
Yeah. Well,
something to look forward to.
But yeah, so I didn't know anything about it. I was aware of, you know, New York and like the port cities in Long Island, but I wasn't aware of anything on the Pacific Coast. And it was this book that really opened my eyes to what was going on. And I thought, wow, if I'm so intrigued by this, like maybe other people will be too. And it would be like a great background for a mystery too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it's like the real life has so much to it that we don't need to like be dreaming up things. You know how people say, how do you get your ideas? I mean, the ideas is just like you said, looking at what happened in India in the fall of 1921 and or the summer of 43.
I have a question for you. So how far in your novel is the Indian War for Independence? Like how much did you like hew to facts, and like what was yours and what was factual?
Okay, so I'm 26 years away from independence, but and the British had arrived in the 1600s, and you know there were other colonials there too. It wasn't just the British. There were just so many. They were Dutch, they were French, there's even some Scandinavian, like I was just hearing, I can't remember, Danish. I mean, there was just all kinds. But the British really did manage to successfully land grab in different ways through the country. And there were feelings of people wanting the really overt, publicized, notorious freedom battles began in the middle of the 19th century. And so sure, I could have started my book then, but it's so far from the goal. You know, like I like where I am now because people have solidified that there are bands of revolutionaries. Like I talk about some of the freedom fighting groups in this book that are not, sort of nonviolent resistance. That really comes through, that the different sections and even people outside of India were interested in freeing India. So there was a lot going on by the time of the 1920s. And there's the virtue of that women were, that women had gone to college and that some of them were working. That there were more things for my characters to do to become powerful. And also I think the British are realizing that it's not as easy as they thought it could be, but they're just valiantly holding on, and that's why they brought Prince Edward.
Right. Well,
let's talk about Prince Edward.
Let's talk about Prince Edward, because as I know him, the Duke of Windsor.
Yeah,
you know him as Prince Edward, which I love that he's so many things to so many people.
Yeah, like I've said before, that it would be great if our characters could meet. That's not.
Oh yeah.
Yet Prince Edward is in both our books, or Edward. We should just say Edward, the Royal Edward, and in different ways. So in my book, he's 27 years old. He's blonde. He's dashing. He's had an affair with a married woman already. And so he kind of, I think he liked married women.
Oh, yeah.
That was just something he liked. And what I had to be careful about is I did not want to fabricate stuff for him in India. But like, I didn't want to fabricate a girlfriend for him. I didn't want to do anything really crazy, because when you have public figures like that, and this is the same for Mahatma Gandhi, there are people that are scholars of every day of their lives. And so, for example, I believe that I had read that Edward, that people would call him Eddie sometimes, that knew him. But someone wrote to me and said, oh no, they called him, Michael or something like that.
David, actually.
David.
The royal family called him David, which is like, what? How many names does one human need? But
yes,
he was apparently David.
I was very excited to learn that he had briefly been at Oxford, and he wasn't a great student. He was more of a partier. And I figured out I learned what college he was in. And I thought, oh, that's great, because college, Perveen has this sort of would-be beau, Colin Sandringham, who was there at that time. And so that's the way that I get him into the story. And so tell me about the book that Edward is in your series, and a little bit about how you use him.
So my Edward is the Duke of Windsor, and this is after he's abdicated the throne for Mrs. Simpson. It was this whole sort of romantic thing for many people. I don't know. I didn't really see it that way, but so he abdicated the throne, and then what we think of now as Queen Elizabeth, her father took the throne because he was the next brother in line, and Edward and Mrs. Simpson were kind of banished. And the thing is, he had this long association with Nazi Germany and traveled there and was great friends with a lot of the high-ranking Nazis. And there are pictures of him with Hitler. And so I wanted to do something which is all conjecture, unlike you, which is pretty much conjecture, but I think there's serious historical basis for it, that if and when the Germans invaded England as they had planned, they would have put Edward and Mrs. Simpson on the throne because they were Nazi supporters, and they would have gotten rid of the current royal family with, Princesses Margaret and Princess Elizabeth. And so that really sort of, there isn't like a lot of time spent on him, but that's what drives the plot.
Yeah. That just what a thought of how close at times how the war could have turned another way.
In those days, it was really sort of up for grabs too. I mean, it was, I don't know. I just think there are so many places like following the chronology of the war where things could have gone the other way so easily, and it's just sort of a miracle it didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he doesn't have a lot of camera time, unlike your book. He doesn't have a lot of like on page time, but his shadow is long.
Well, I was fortunate that when he was there, the government was so excited that they wrote this like a press briefing every day of what he did, where he went, everything that he said, everything that people said about him. So then I could populate my scenes with people that I would, and of course they're fictitious people. I wasn't trying to do a complete recap, but I was able to put, people in that you wouldn't have thought would be there, like certain Indian lords and, people that became very powerful politically, and that was interesting to see that they were there. And so I used that kind of structure, like, oh, he's at the Orient Club at lunch, and then he went somewhere else, and I think about, do I want Colin at this or that, or how does he get away from him? And then there's a conversation in a train where he starts trying to get him to see the real India. I doubt that really happened, but so that was one of my fictions. So I would say,
well, yeah, but that's fun for the reader.
But I don't say that, I don't have the prince like rushing to kiss Perveen.
Right. I don't have him kissing anybody in my books either, so we're safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So just to lighten the mood a bit, because we're talking about all these serious things, I have some lightning round questions for you. Do you drink tea or coffee when you write?
Well, all morning it's coffee, but it's half. So, like I figured that way I can drink twice the amount of coffee because it's half. And then in the afternoon, I might have a little tea, but usually it's decaffeinated because I go to bed really early. What about you? Are you tea or coffee?
I do coffee in the morning, and because I can only do 1 cup of caffeine, I try to make it last throughout the entire morning, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and then maybe some tea in the afternoon. But I'm trying to like do more water and be healthy and all that stuff. So yeah. And when do you write? It sounds like you write in the morning mostly.
Yeah,
or?
I do, and I like a great day to me is actually getting up at 5 o'clock. Like I like being up that early.
Okay.
But the thing is, I'm in a great mood then. And that's the kind of mood that, yes, I could write, but I could also garden, or I could go to the pool, or I could walk for an hour. Like, see, all those kinds of things come rushing at me, but it's really like that's where the chi is highest. I should be writing. So I try to do that first, and then because my energy is so good then I can work for a shorter period of time and then do the other stuff. How do you organize your writing day?
Well, first of all, I'm so jealous of you because I've always wanted to be an early riser. I rise at, I don't know, 7, mostly because I have a teenage son and I have to get him up for school and, make sure all of the things are done. And he's not eating cookies for breakfast. And then I begrudgingly wake up and start to work. But I do like to work first thing because I feel like I'm fresher. But I feel like if I don't get good work done in the morning, then I'll take it into the afternoon and evening just because to like get my daily word count or my daily work done. It's sort of like when I'm done, I'm done. So it could be early or it could be late.
When I was a young writer and I had a little tiny baby, Lisa Scottolini said, well, it's no problem not having a babysitter, just write at night. And she could just write at night for hours and hours. Like, people that have that nighttime energy, I think that's really cool because I think nighttime is often squandered. I mean, I really do. I think the hours between 6 and 11 are that, it's easy just to like do dumb stuff like look at Facebook or, watch a show. Though I should say there's some great shows out there that I'm discovering and that I'm missing, that I know I'm missing. So there's something to be said. I think the important thing is to just try to work every day. I know I missed 2 days last week. It's harder to get back into it.
I definitely feel like I need to work literally every day just to kind of like keep it real because when I take too many days off, I don't know if this happens to you, but it starts to feel very distant and book-like instead of real.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, one more really short question. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Do you think everybody knows what that means?
I don't know. Why don't you tell people what that means?
Because I think that everybody just thinks that people know what it means, but especially the pantser. Because wasn't there some kind of like a World War term about pantsers or?
Oh yeah, God. Yeah. I didn't even think of that, but yeah.
Yeah. So a pantser is supposed to be somebody that just sits down and they just make the stuff up as it goes along, like it just flows. They just let it take them. And is it something about the seat of the pants? Like I don't even.
Yeah, you're writing by the seat of your pants.
You're writing by the seat of your pants. Okay, and then the idea is like that you have everything laid out. A plotter has written the whole plan. And
right,
so
it has it outlined.
I am more toward the plotter because I have to write an outline to, get my book contract. And I'm a very forgetful person. So at some point at the beginning, the plotting is just like is some pages where I sort of like a general vision for the book. But then as I get going, I break it down into chapters so I can remember what I did and I remember what I need to do. So now I know I'm in probably the last 15% of my book, which is a great feeling. And when I do that, I can see, oh, look, it really isn't so hard. Just don't go meander. Do not meander. If you want to have your showdown, write just fix a few things, and then you go to your showdown. So what about you, Susan?
I was funny. I did a talk with Mariah Fredericks. She does the Jane Prescott mysteries, which are wonderful.
Yes.
If you haven't read them, I really adore them. And we realized after sort of a little back and forth that we were ploncers, which is her very fancy way of saying we do both, which means basically we write extremely detailed outlines and then don't follow them. So, but we like having the structure, and we like having knowing that there's a roadmap. It doesn't feel as scary. Even when we go off-road, if there's a map at least, then we feel more in control. Mm-hmm. So that is a new term, ploncer, and Mariah and I have patented it.
Well, now I've got a question for you. Taking that onto a macro level,
yes.
Does the whole Maggie Hope series follow an arc, and does it end at the war's end?
It does, actually. So I'm thinking there will be, it will go to book 16, God willing. And I do have a whole end game, and it has to do with the end of the war, with Maggie's mother, with Maggie's love life. Everything's going to come to a head. And I really want the series to end around, or on even VE Day, that mm-hmm. big celebration in London. So I have it all planned out.
I think it's really unusual for an author to say, my series is going to come to an end, and I'm actually excited about writing the last book. I've never heard anybody say that.
Well, I can't say I'm not sad. I can't say it's not going to change, but there is a really big story with Maggie and her family that is still unresolved. And that's sort of the crux of her journey. As well as her sort of romantic entanglements mm-hmm. and, of course, the war. But I feel like that's what I'm building to. And I want to build to it and make it really strong. And I want to make it really, really amazing. And I think you can only do that when you know what you're going to be working on and, the steps you're going to take to the end. That's just my opinion.
I think it's super admirable, and I really, really like it. And I think more of us should be following that lead.
That's just for me. That's the other thing is also talking about her character. I don't think Maggie Hope is the kind of woman to become a Cold War spy, because that would be the way to extend it, right? To extend the series, she would become some sort of, do something with the Russians in London. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think she would do that. I think she'd really be you know what? I did my bit for the war, and now I'm getting out of this, and I'm going back to civilian life, and I'm going to have a real life. And I think she kind of deserves it. She deserves a bit of a happily ever after, or at least mm-hmm. hopefully ever after. So what about Perveen though? Do you have a plan? Are you plotting? Are you pantsing? Are you?
So right now, Perveen is only 23 years old, and it's 1921. And in 47, when India becomes independent, she'd be 49 years old.
Wow.
It's she. I just don't want to leap, but I don't think I want to go that far.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I can give a happy ending to the series in terms of that. The British are gone and India is now going to be independent, and the truth is, after the British left, they had that Duke in Edwina's husband, Mountbatten. He was in charge for a couple of years,
mm-hmm.
and then after that, it was just. It's it's a rocky journey, is what I'm saying. So it's not as clear cut as winning a war.
True.
You know, so it's like, so I don't even feel that that would be the right thing. So I don't know how long I'll go with it, but I do know that there are a lot of stories within the independence fight. And there also are these fascinating developments for Perveen and her relationship, because she's living in this book that people will be reading, that she's living as a separated woman. She's not legally divorced because she can't get a divorce. But, you know, she's kind of testing waters a little bit in this book. And that actually is something that I want to talk to you about. And that's the specter of romance within, you know, like a traditional mystery. Because, of course, there are a lot of mysteries that are very heavy on romance. And that's a very central part. And I feel like we both write really strong women characters that actually have paying jobs in, you know, that in this world, yet they both have these admirers, and that they sometimes take agency with their own sexuality, right?
Yeah, I thought that was important. I don't know, when I was writing Maggie and when she was first sort of getting into romance, I felt like that was really important. And I do feel like, and I want to talk to you about Perveen, but I feel like for women during World War II, there was a chance to exercise more agency about their romantic lives and their sexuality, because, you know, in sort of quote unquote normal times, women went from their father's house to their husband's house. And with the war and with the men being away and with the women working on the home front, you know, there would be situations like Maggie where women would be roommates together, or, you know, and women would be working alongside men, and things were just so different. And when you read the first person accounts of what went on, especially in London, there's a wonderful book called The Love Charm of Bombs, which is first person accounts from all these amazing writers who lived in London during the Blitz, including like Virginia Woolf. But like everybody was having crazy sex. Like seriously, that's like the running theme of this book, is that like the rules went out the window with, you know, the bombing. So it was kind of like cool. I thought I really liked writing that.
So in India, there was the situation where in the British couples were separated at times of like really big heat. Like the women would go up to the mountains, to the mountain resorts, and they would have affairs with bachelor British civil servants who went up there specifically knowing that there were going to be these willing older women. So there was stuff going on there. And then, of course, a lot of the British men had affairs with Indian women, and very rarely married them. And the added wrinkle in my world is that Parsi men did marry European women. And so that was a really, so and also people that were like Maharajas, they had access to beautiful European, Australian, and American women. And so there were a whole lot of marriages like that. And so people were active in my era too. And one of the big constraints was birth control. And so finding out about birth control at that time and how people managed, and that has been really interesting for me. And I'm going to be writing a whole lot about that in my fourth book in the series. It has a lot to do with like reproduction, in terms of maternal health, children dying, people trying to get birth control, people being prosecuted for abortion. That sounds very serious, but I promise you it's an entertaining mystery.
It's part of being female at that point in time. And can I just say, I loved how you dealt with issues of menstruation in India. Yes, I said the word, I brought it up. But like in the first book, especially, I remember just I learned so much about how that went on in India, and I was really sort of amazed.
Yeah, it's not going on anymore. So unless going into different communities in rural areas. But yeah, that was kind of a taboo to mention things like menstruation in books. But I did it when I was in menopause already. So fond memories, right? So I think that once women get to a certain age that we really throw out a lot of convention, or worries about what people think of us.
Well, it's funny because when I was doing a lot of the research for Maggie being a spy and going to Berlin and then going to Paris, one of the things I was really interested in was like the whole experience about being dropped in a foreign country, including like what happens when these women got their periods. Like I was really thinking about like what's the like that they had to worry about it. And you had to get, if you're going to France, you had to get the French brand, sanitary protection, and wear like the French garters and all this stuff, which I've never seen anyone else pick up like in terms of like having female spies. So I don't know, but I was just like, I was really trying to imagine like all of the things like you'd have to plan for. So I don't know. I'm just putting it out there because I felt like we sort of both did this.
Yeah,
I feel bonded.
Details. It's like the things about daily life are what people care about. Like I
think it grounds it. It really grounds it.
I just got a question from an Indian reporter about this book, The Bombay Prince, and she asked me, was there really a Prince of Wales cake sold at the Wellington Bakery? And so I wrote this book, I don't know, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot even remember if it's a real detail because it sounds very real, but I can't find where I had it. Like keeping track of all of that is so hard.
Isn't that funny? Because like, okay, so you guys out there, like we're talking to you about these books, and they just came out, but we worked on them like years ago, literally, like, for me, like a year ago. And like my head is filled with all these details from the current book. So it's very much like, oh, okay, let's like try to remember what we, what research was done and everything.
That's
it's
why
hard
I
sometimes.
Talk about sex, Susan, because that's what I'm working on in my new book. So
all right.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm getting I got a question. I want to tell you the question.
Oh yeah. Oh, I don't see any.
Oh, I found just one question, and I want to encourage people to send more. I'm happily engrossed in the Praveen Mysteries series and look forward to the next one. How do you or when do you decide what would be the next best thing to hook your reader to look forward to in the next book in the series? Thank you. And that's from Judy. That's a good question. And for me, it actually usually comes in the last month that I'm working on the book. When I know that I'm confident, I'm closing up the details, and I'm feeling happy and like a lot of things were answered, that's when I can start to dream. And usually something that happened in the book I'm just finishing gives me an idea. Like in The Bombay Prince, Praveen finds out that her sister-in-law Gulnaz is pregnant, and that's just like very small mention thing. But I've always been interested in these maternity hospitals because in the Parsi community, women would go to a hospital to give birth, and then they would stay there 44 days later. That was part of the custom. And I had access to go into this old maternity hospital and So I was interested. So like that's how I got it. Like it was just this little thing, and I thought, wow, maybe I could actually bring a baby into the new book. So what about you and your idea plan? Because it sounds like you've gone pretty far out if you can envision.
Well, part of it is just sort of looking ahead and seeing what's going on in the next phase of the war. So, and also like what research I've done that's really piqued my interest. So, in the last few decades, there's been a lot of new information discovered about Coco Chanel and how she worked with her Nazi secret agent lover. And I'm not even making any of this up. Like, this is for real.
Mm-hmm.
And how they tried to use her connection with Winston Churchill to broker a separate peace without Hitler. And I just thought that was so fascinating. And I don't think a lot of people know that because, you know, of course, it didn't come to anything. The British wouldn't make a separate peace. So that was just one of the things I thought, like, because that's actually right the fall and winter after the Hollywood Spy is set. So I just thought, like, wow, that would be so cool. And then Maggie already has this relationship with Coco Chanel. Of course, she has a relationship with Winston Churchill. So it kind of all like tied together in a cool history nerd bow for me.
Yeah, one of the things that was very interesting to me about the Hollywood Spy is how the end of the book really is giving a premonition of what's going to come in the next book. And I was really intrigued by that. Have you ever done that before?
I have done that. I think to greater and less success. I think this one worked because it really wraps up while still sort of giving some hints about the next book. And I was talking to another author. Anyway, it's amazing how into like our next book we start to get when it gets hard, like in the current book. So I was doing a lot of like illicit research on Coco Chanel in 1943 when I should have been working on the Hollywood Spy, just because, you know, it's always more fun to think about the book you're not writing. But
yeah, I agree. And I'm really interested in Coco Chanel. I did know she was complicit with the Nazis, but I didn't know that it was to that point that she was.
It's to that point. It really is. Yeah. So I think, like, you know, I'm excited to write about that.
Yeah.
So, and how do you do it? Like when you're wrapping up a Perveen mystery, how much do you know about your next book?
Not a whole lot, just general themes. And like, that's the thing that I think, I don't know, it maybe that another similarity between us. There are mystery writers, and what gets them excited is the idea of a crime or the idea of a twist. And what gets me excited is something about that time period, like women's health, trying to start women's hospitals, and how were people treated when they had, you know, these unplanned pregnancies, what happened. Like, so I get interested in an idea. I get interested in, the Prince of Wales came and there were all these riots. Those are the kind of things that work for me. What about you? Would you say it's similar?
Absolutely. I love where our concept of history and actual facts about history diverge. So, for instance, in the Hollywood Spy in the U.S. in 1943, there was this national mythology of Americans standing shoulder to shoulder. And to a large extent, that was true, but it also wasn't true. There was so much, you know, racism, sexism, like everything you can think of. It was not necessarily a great time to be a person of color or a woman. And so I wanted to sort of juxtapose those things, like how Americans were standing shoulder to shoulder in the war effort, but also how much more complicated that history is. So
you wrote a really great article in Crime Reads for everybody, the crimereads.com website, which is about what the Hollywood canteen really was like, and which is mentioned in your, you know, quite a bit in the book, and that supposedly blacks and whites could both enjoy, everybody could enjoy themselves, but it didn't come off that way in reality, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting case of reading the sort of national narrative and then going and also reading like first person accounts on what visiting the canteen was really like. And I found this amazing book called Dance for Democracy. And it was basically about racism and segregation in the canteens that were supposed to be for everyone, for every soldier. And it was about how the Black soldiers really weren't welcome unless there were Black hostesses that could dance with them, because they weren't allowed to dance with white women. And also the females who were in the military weren't allowed to dance at all. They'd have to go upstairs to like a viewing room and like look down over all the fun. So they were segregated from everybody. So they couldn't dance with the soldiers of any color. And it was just sort of like not what you see like in these movies. And I have like a fictional movie called Hollywood Canteen. But, there was, Stage Door Canteen is like one of the famous movies from that time. And it's just so sort of integrated, but with like people of color in the background. But it's just, it is weird. And I just wanted to like sort of unravel that in that Crime Reads article, because I thought it was like a lot more complicated than we are used to thinking about.
Yeah, that was going on in World War II in India, because there were troops from the US and Britain there. And the Black troops were not welcome in the nightclubs where the Indian women were dancing, because the white men wanted to be the only people there. They didn't want anybody who was Black in the club. So that there was a lot of stuff going on there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Because I don't see any more. Like, but are you seeing questions? I'm sorry.
No, and I know we're getting close to the end, so I don't know.
So guys, if you have questions, we're here for a little bit longer.
Yeah. Well, we say hi back to Judith and to Faye. My gosh, Faye has finished both of the latest books. Man, I wonder how much she reads.
Oh my gosh, Vicky Bajour is your agent?
Yes, she was on. Yeah, she may still be on. I don't know.
Okay, in another lifetime, I worked for who's now a very famous editor named Pamela Dorman. She has her own imprint, and I remember taking calls from Vicky Bajour.
Oh, really?
So we have a connection. She probably doesn't remember me, but yes, I
wow, I didn't know that you had an insider job in.
Oh yeah, my first career was in publishing. I worked at Random House and the Little Random imprint, and I worked for Viking Penguin. That's when I worked for Pam, and that's when I met Vicky. So I have a whole New York publishing background. Yeah.
Did that make it harder or easier to submit, do you think?
Oof. I think submitting is always hard, regardless. I think, it's easier in that you can sort of picture the process and sort of understand what's going on in editorial meetings. Because I've been to some brutal ones where, the fate of books are decided. So it's I don't know, it's a mixed blessing. It's you sort of know how the sausage is made.
Yeah, I just read The Other Black Girl.
Yes.
Elia Harris. She's got 3 names. I'm forgetting what the third name is. And that was a really, it's kind of cool to read a novel about publishing.
Absolutely.
Because it was so different than what my image was from when I drop in and, have lunch with somebody and I don't see this underbelly or anything. Did you think that was a realistic? Did you read?
You know what? I'm going on vacation next week, and that's in my pile of books that I'm taking. So I actually haven't read it yet. But from everything I've read about it, it looks so on point, shall we say?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think that now within the world, and I would say that book is a thriller, and so we thriller people. You don't just have to be a traditional mystery. And there's more and more horror coming in to thrillers and even historic thrillers. Like Mexican Gothic was a book I really enjoyed. And that had this sort of magic realist horror in it. And I really enjoy that. It's not something that I've done, but it's something that kind of gives me goosebumps. And I think you'll enjoy it. So yeah, Vicky said that she is I know she's a huge fan of your books, and she's an old friend of your agents for some years.
Yes, Victoria. Wow. Yeah, it's just so funny. Like ultimately, like everybody in publishing is like 2 degrees of separation from each other. So.
Okay, well, since we've got you, the expert, on, what do you tell aspiring writers? Because you've seen it. You're not just the writer, but you've seen it on the other side. And like, what kind of advice do you give people these days?
You know, ultimately, people in publishing are readers. You don't go into publishing to make $1 bazillion. You know, people go into publishing because they love books. And I think it's good to keep in mind that regardless of what happens, people do love books and they're looking for that next amazing read and they want to find the next amazing read. So it's not as sort of dismissive as you might think. Maybe I'm looking at it as glass half full instead of glass half empty. But I mean, it's my real non-cynical take on the publishing industry is that despite of all the craziness, people really just want to find that next book where they just can't put it down and they want to tell all their friends about it. So that's my take. Just remember, like, there are readers there and you just have to connect with the person who loves your style of book. And what about you?
Well, I would add to that I think that a lot of us want to do something original. And how are you going to stand out? And you like these books that are a certain way. And so I feel, I always say, write the book that you want to read that doesn't exist for you yet, if that makes any sense. Like, I wanted to read a mystery, but I wanted it to be about somebody that, you know, didn't look like every other person, and that was an immigrant, and that, you know, those kinds of things mattered to me, and that was missing. And I think that everybody has things about them that are special and different, and work experiences that are different, and childhood experiences and places that they've been. And, you know, and of course, that doesn't mean that everybody would be writing a mystery that gets published, because the other part of it is, how much determination do you have? How much are you going to give up? Because you give up a lot of leisure time. And it's not a feeling that just goes away and like all of a sudden I've learned those skills. It's something I have to keep on reminding myself how I want to have another book published next year. I want to be connecting with my readers next year. You know, that's why I am getting up at 5.
Yeah. And your readers are so thankful for that. I say that as one of your readers. I'm like thrilled that there'll be another Perveen coming out next year. So yay. So is our host going to come back to sort of like say goodbye, or do we do this? Or
Josie? I hope she does.
Hi.
Hey guys. Well, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. This was an absolutely fantastic conversation. I wish I could let you both keep talking for another hour. But it's perhaps getting late and we can let people go back to their families and their homes. But I just wanted to thank you both again for taking the time to speak with us tonight and with each other. And I hope you had as much fun as we did.
Yeah, we did.
So much fun. Thank you for having us. And
yes, and I want to
Sujata, let's hang out in person.
Yeah, okay. And if you haven't got the book yet, there is no better place to get your book than from an independent bookstore.
Like absolutely.
Books. They've got a link right there. You're keeping indies in business. And boy, was my indie bookstore a lifesaver for me. Living in Baltimore, we have a store very similar that gets in great people virtually, and it was so wonderful to, have a book appear on my porch or go to a doorstep and get a book. And, that just kept things going. So thank you so much for having us, because you have a choice. Everybody wants to be touring and can't be touring. So Josie, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Okay.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, and thanks for sticking with us. My goodness, 45 people tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. That's a real party. It's a super spreader event. It's if we've been together, so we absolutely couldn't have. So.
Yeah, but next year in person.
Yeah, and stay well, everybody. I shouldn't be joking like that. Okay. All right. Take care.
Good night, everyone.